On behalf of everybody here and on behalf of the public, I want to thank you for engaging in it at a time in truth when I know you've been advised not to. So thank you so very, very much. Thank you. Sam Bankman-Fried, everybody.
Hi, this is Paul Play from Edge, and you are listening to Coin Fugazi.
Of course, that's a Fugazi. All right?
That's a Fugazi? How do you know it's a Fugazi? You looked at it for 2 seconds.
Well, it's a fake.
Yeah, I know what a Fugazi is.
It's all a Fugazi. You know what a Fugazi is?
No, Fugazi. It's a fake.
Yeah, Fugazi. It's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust. It doesn't.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi.
Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi. Coin Fugazi.
We have decided to liquidate SBF, FTX, CZ in a week that shook the world Satoshi created. This installment, we're joined by Ian Freeman, co-founder and longtime host of Free Talk Live, a radio and internet show responsible for bringing on board some of the earliest crypto adopters in the world. He's also the last of the so-called Crypto Six, a half dozen New Hampshire residents charged in early 2021 by the Department of Justice after about a 5-year investigation. They charged them with money laundering, operating its continuing financial crimes enterprise, unlicensed money transmitting business. They threw some tax evasion charges for good measure. Ian Freeman is the last man standing among the six, and he is a personal hero. Ian Freeman, thank you, man, so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks, Ed, for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, right away, there's a lot to talk about in instant contrast, but before I get into your particular plight and what's happening right now, which is super, super important, I reached out to your wife, and because we've had some nice correspondence over the last few months about what's going on with you, and I reached out. For some reason, you just popped instantly into my mind when this started happening and unraveling. I thought, I wonder what Ian thinks of all this, considering what you're going through. But for the time being, let's put aside the Crypto Six stuff. What's your take on SBF and FTX and all that stuff happening right now?
You know, I didn't really become aware of Bankman. I like to call him Bankman. I didn't really become aware of him, I think, until like a year or so ago. And I started seeing posts about him putting his face on all these advertisements for FTX. I'd heard of FTX, and then just as one of the myriad of centralized Bitcoin exchanges out there. But this guy was like promoting himself almost as much as it seemed as his exchange. What caught my attention was like a full-size building advertisement. You know how they have these huge sides of a building like in New York City that they'll put ads up on, and this guy's face was literally 10 stories tall. And I thought, wow, the ego behind this character. And, subsequently I learned about all his supposed altruism and all this. And then, of course, the fall of FTX happened, about 2 weeks ago, I think now, at this point. And it's been pretty fascinating to watch. Of course, we've talked about it on my radio show, Free Talk Live. And, my general perspective on this is that I wouldn't expect a whole lot to happen to him, given how politically connected he is. And secondly, that he's not even in the United States. So I think he's relatively safe from prosecution, but, we'll see about that. But I think the big takeaway here is that a lot of people are freaking out. Certainly the mainstream media is using this as their latest excuse to, call Bitcoin dead and crypto over, which of course they've been saying for, a decade now. And I think it's important to remind people that we've seen this before. I mean, maybe FTX is the biggest exchange to fail, but it's certainly not the only exchange that has ever failed. We've seen the exchanges go under. We've seen them get hacked. We've seen their founders mysteriously die. So, there's been a whole laundry list of these exchanges that have gone down in various ways over the year, going all the way back to MT Gox, which was the very first one. So, we've been through this before, and unfortunately, people will go through this again because some people will not learn to keep their crypto off of these centralized exchanges, and there's always new people getting into crypto. So they don't know. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you have to learn the hard way. I remember learning the hard way a long time ago. I don't even remember what it was called, but back in the early days, you might remember it. There was one of these online wallets, and Mark Edge and I, we stored a bunch of Bitcoin on there. And all of a sudden, the owner of the site claimed they got hacked, and somebody like put a threat out against the dude's life, and all of a sudden he coughs up 50% of the Bitcoins. I don't remember what it was called, but
Yeah, I'm struggling to find it right now in my head. But yeah. I remember.
But this was years ago. I mean, this was probably 10 years ago at this point, and that's when I learned the lesson. So this is just that lesson being taught over again.
There's some parallels, as awkward as it seems and weirdly as it seems, between yourself and Sam Bankman-Fried and what he's present.
Really?
And I'm I guess shoehorning them in. I'm struggling to make them for the purposes here of the show, but there are a couple, and one of them is the fact, well, maybe not parallels, but an interesting contrast in this sense. He's part of that 2017 class that came in at the height of the speculative bubble. Then at the height that bubble, the whole 20K or whatever back in December of 2017. He that's what caught his attention. He began arbing and so on, and the rest is history. It's interesting to contrast that with you, who came in, relatively early, maybe 3 years, maybe less, into Bitcoin's existence, and really at the birth of this whole enterprise. It strikes me as, because he didn't even know what a blockchain was. He, like you say, he was kind of asking for crypto regulation. He was really a new character, this new breed, this 2017 class that I found. Again, he was not really on my radar. I just don't have any dealings with FTX. I mean, like you, I knew of him and so on, but he struck me as just the polar. I mean, obviously in hindsight that makes sense, but I'm saying before all this, he struck me as the polar opposite of the whole point behind Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what got you into crypto and how that's just, it wasn't an ARB opportunity for you. It wasn't a chance to make markets more efficient. You weren't looking in terms of effective altruism. These sorts of things. What was well, I'll stop there.
Sure. So I mean, we got into Bitcoin back before there were any altcoins, and it was our radio show Free Talk Live, where a guy called in. He was sort of a known quantity. He'd been a longtime listener of the show. He called in from Australia, and he told us about Bitcoin. And this was, I think, toward the end of 2011, maybe sometime in 2011. I don't know. But anyway, he called in to tell us about it. And of course, we were pretty skeptical on our first hearing of it. But Roger Ver was listening that night, and he is, of course, one of the biggest promoters in the world of cryptocurrency. Also a controversial character, of course, with the whole Bitcoin Cash schism that happened also in 2017. But he was listening, and he really did catch the vision for it. And I remember hearing him tell the story about how he spent a week of his life without sleeping and just constantly researching Bitcoin and learning about it, and then finally investing in it. And I don't know how much money he put into it, but he was a successful businessman at that time. He was a sponsor of Free Talk Live at that time for his memory dealers business. And he started asking us at some point if we would take payment for advertising that again, he was already a sponsor, if he could pay us in Bitcoin. I remember just being, okay, well, we want to make our client happy, but we still have bills to pay. So I said, well, we'll take 10%. And, had I said 100%, in the very beginning, we'd probably have had 10 times as much Bitcoin. But regardless, it still worked out pretty well, all things considered. And I'm really grateful that everything panned out the way it did. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. And that's kind of what I wanted to sort of get
wait, there was more of the philosophy aspect.
The philosophy, right.
Yeah. So it wasn't about, number can go up, which is what a lot of people get into Bitcoin for, it seems like these days, and as a major division between people who have different philosophies on this. The viewpoint that I think that the libertarian voluntarist types have on Bitcoin is that it's a tool to enhance individual freedom. all around the planet, and reduce the violence of the state as well. So I mean, it is kind of altruistic from that perspective, as far as, you know, spreading cryptocurrency is a, you know, mission, if you will, to get people to get out of the government money system, and every dollar that we can get out of that government money and put it into cryptocurrency or any other alternative for that matter. I like the gold back, for instance. I think it's a really cool physical form of currency. But anything we can get out of that dollar or euro or whatever central bank system is value that the state can't easily touch, that they can't easily tax, they can't easily inflate, to then do things like go to war and bomb innocent people in the Middle East or wherever other part of the world. So from that perspective, it is a very kind of altruistic thing of, this is important. This is like really critical for the future of humanity, and especially for individual rights and freedom. And so, you know, a lot of us see Bitcoin as a way to undermine the status quo of centralized banks and big banks and put the power of money in the hands of the individual. And that's a very different perspective from somebody who just says, oh, here's a new investment class.
Yeah.
You know, number go up.
Yeah, no, it's striking, because I can't have the kind of conversation I'm having with you anymore. It just doesn't, you know, it's considered sort of passe, almost cliche, a little dinosauric. It's interesting. It's just interesting where the space has gone. So smash cut.
Well, we did want to see. I'm sorry to interrupt again.
No,
I mean, you know, in the early days, everybody wanted to see Bitcoin get bigger, right? Like, I mean, that's inevitable that it has to become more popular in order for it to catch on, and in order for it to become more popular means, you know, people who don't have the same philosophy that we do are going to get into it, and so, you know, just like you know, just like the punk band that jumps the shark and it sells out for the record contract. To some extent, that's happening with cryptocurrency, right? Like it's getting big enough to where these institutional types, these regulator types, are getting interested in getting involved, and that's, for better or for worse, inevitably where things had to go. But that doesn't mean that we can't sort of keep the dream alive and stay true to our vision. And certainly, you know, people like the folks that are involved with Bitcoin Cash and Dash. You know, these are people who still have the vision for crypto being used as a transactional currency, and they're still, you know, driving forward on that. So I'm really glad to see that those sectors do still exist.
Yeah, there are pockets, there are remnants for sure. It's just it's an interesting time to be in crypto looking back. So smash cut to spring of 2021. You're asleep, you're in your home, and the alphabet boys and gals come knocking, right?
Smash would have been the right word. They literally smashed in a couple of windows on the first floor of my home. They flew a drone inside the house.
Two Bearcats? Is that right?
Two Bearcats were on the property. It's a duplex, so they also used one of the Bearcats with a battering ram on the front to push in the front door of the next door side. And my friend and co-host Nobody, that's his legal name, by the way, was over there at the time, and he was up programming, and so they sent in men with guns and they smashed the glass, and I, you know, demanded we come downstairs, and you know, had to pick up my dog. Luckily they let me pick the dog up so he didn't have to walk on the broken glass. We tapped out our shoes to get all the broken glass, or as much of it as we could, out before we put them on and go outside. They forced me to put the dog down at that point, and then he just ran around the neighborhood for 20 minutes or whatever before somebody finally picked him up and put him in an FBI truck. There were roughly 50 agents there, from what I understand. Most of them were armed and, you know, pointing rifles and things like that. It was a pretty crazy situation, and luckily we actually have surveillance footage of it. So anyone who wants to actually see a little bit of what it was like, they can go to thecrypto6.com, which is not my website, but if you go there, then you can see the 5-minute sort of supercut of what happened here. It's pretty crazy. All of this over, you know, victimless financial so-called crimes.
I think, you know, as bad as that is, it's not as bad as having to live in the Bahamas in a $38 million mansion and have to do your own shopping. So, you know, I think as you're complaining, I think you need to think of our good friend SBF here and all that he's going through right now.
Tough times for
tough
the bank
times
man.
for Sam. Poor Sam. You know what I think is I'm being drippingly sarcastic there. Something tells me that if I pushed you, if I scratched you, and we kept talking and talking and talking intellectually, you'd probably say, "Look, I don't want anything bad to happen to Sam either. Like, I don't want him to be thrown in jail." Am I right about that?
Well, I don't know what it is that he actually did, right? There's
Right.
allegations that fraud was involved here, and I don't certainly think that people who haven't actually harmed anyone else should go to prison. I think that if fraud was involved, then he should probably make his victims whole. I don't think sitting in a prison cell would necessarily help that, right? Because you can't do much inside a prison to make your victims whole. So, I mean, of course, we're talking about billions of dollars. So, can that ever truly be accomplished? Probably not. Can he, do something, provide some amount of compensation? Probably. To what level? I don't know. But yeah, I'm not the kind of person who just says, throw somebody in a prison cell and that's going to make everything better, because it generally doesn't. It's not going to fill, when somebody gets harmed by an actual criminal, it usually doesn't fill a hole inside of the person who lost a loved one or was hurt. I think forgiveness is generally the order of the day for these sorts of things. And ultimately, it's, it is the individual's problem for trusting their funds with somebody else. I mean, that's not to say he's not to be blamed or does not have blame for what he did or allegedly did. Again, I don't know all the details, but, not your keys, not your coins. This is the age-old lesson that has been taught so many times in so many brutal ways, and it hurts when that happens. But it's best to forgive and learn the lesson and just move on rather than obsessing over getting vengeance on somebody.
And I wanted listeners to definitely hear that. So I'm glad you said it. It gives you some insight. It gives the listener some insight rather into your thinking. So again, the contrast is just so deep, because even as I read the public the press release released by the DOJ back then, they referred to the people who interacted with you as customers, which is really, really, really interesting. Not victims. As far as I know, you've never employed violence against people.
Oh goodness, no.
Okay. So this seems really, really, really interesting, because Sam is probably going to, live out a nice, very comfortable life, and of infamy for sure, but nevertheless comfortable life. What's your exposure? So exposure in the legal sense to people who are listening is not necessarily what's going to happen, but should the worst occur, what are you currently facing or looking at?
Well, I'm facing, I don't know, roughly 25 charges. I think you went over some of them, and there's multiple counts of some of them. And one of the charges has a 10-year minimum sentence. That's the continuing so-called financial crimes enterprise. I was the only one of the 6 that was hit with that one. So all totaled up, if they were to be sentenced consecutively, it could be over 400 years in prison. But I mean, realistically, it probably wouldn't be sentenced that way, unless they want to, try to make a Ross Ulbricht out of me and, send a quote unquote send a message. So, anything's possible. But I mean, sentencing guidelines are a thing. The big one, of course, is that 10-year minimum. And I don't have a violent history or anything like that. I've got some convictions for civil disobedience here in New Hampshire over the years. But no actual crimes with any victims. So presumably, it shouldn't be more than, I don't know. It's hard to really say, right? Like, it all depends on how many things we get convicted of and all that. And I'm optimistic, right? Like if I weren't optimistic, I wouldn't be taking this to trial. I would take some sort of plea deal or something like that. But I didn't hurt anybody, and neither did any of the other Crypto 6. It's just they took guilty pleas because they're afraid, as most people are when the feds come after them. We've seen so many cases of people who've sold Bitcoin online who take a plea deal in these cases, and it's because it's scary. I mean, not everybody has the FBI and the ATF and the who else was it? Maybe the Treasury Department,
IRS,
USPS was here, IRS was here. A multi-jurisdictional violent task force smashed their windows in at 6 in the morning. Not everybody in the crypto world has had that experience, so that alone is pretty intimidating. But just knowing that, you could spend years in prison for doing something that never harmed another person, and knowing that juries are, kind of a questionable thing. You never really know what you're going to get with a jury out there. So it's a scary thing to be facing all that time, and they know it. The feds know how to play this game. They know how to intimidate people, and that's why they almost never have to go to trial. I mean, in the history of everybody who's ever been charged for instance, selling on local Bitcoins, it's very, very seldom that somebody will ever go to trial. And so many of these charges have never actually been, from my understanding, have never actually gone in front of a jury. So somebody had to do it.
And again, here's, there's of the 6, 5 have pled out, and you've eloquently, described why someone would do that. You're facing these down. You're facing really life in prison. And Sam Bankman-Fried's got 1 million complainants, maybe. I think there's some, I can't remember the creditors, but it's somewhere in there. There are teachers who have lost pension funds.
Yeah.
Some Ontario, something or other. There are people lost their life savings, venture funds. I mean, not to mention the broader crypto market just crashing.
Yeah, sure.
And whatever happens, that's there. There are victims. Did anybody other than the state, other than, the United States of America, did anybody, any one person come and launch the complaint and said, this guy hurt me?
No, not at all. There's no, the only quote unquote victims in the case are banks and credit unions. And even they had not lost anything. There's no, in the sentencing, for instance, for the 4, by the way, it was one lady had her charges dropped, but the other 4 took a plea. So in the 4 that have taken a plea, 3 of them have been sentenced. The 4th, Aria DiMezzo, is scheduled for sentencing in late January. But of the 3 who've been sentenced so far, 0 restitution. There's 0 loss, and Aria is also 0 when she is sentenced. It will be based on 0 loss in her case. And so, yeah, I mean, these banks made money on what we were doing. So it's pretty ridiculous. The whole thing.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Did you keep up at all with like LBRY and some of that stuff that was going on?
Yeah, LBRY, of course, the creator of LBRY, Jeremy Kauffman, is based here in New Hampshire. So I was doing some, work for their campaign, helping spread the word about the Jeremy Kauffman for Senate campaign. So certainly I'm in touch with Jeremy and people in that universe. Of course, you're referring to their loss, unfortunately, versus the SEC, where the SEC essentially ruled that the LBRY credits are so-called securities, which I think is ridiculous, and hopefully they're going to be appealing that decision.
It is amazing that while they're going after, literally while they're going after you, while they're going after Kaufman's LBRY, while they're going after Kim Kardashian, for Christ's sake, this SBF guy is hobnobbing with Gary Gensler. He's rubbing elbows. I think Maxine Waters is blowing him kisses and something. like this guy is literally Satan, right? And it's just wild to me, man. And I go back and forth. Usually I would kind of keep my composure in an interview and kind of try to be dispassionate and whatever else, but I'm just Ian, God damn it. I feel so horrible for you. But on the other hand, you're a strong dude. You're a principled man. I've only known you from afar, admired you from afar, listening to the radio, listening to the internet shows. I owe you in very indirect way my current lifestyle, my current vocation, for Christ's sake.
Wow, thanks, man.
Yeah, I really do. And I get a chance every so often to say thank you to some people. Your work, your advocacy led to Veer, who started .com, who then one of the headhunters reached out to me when I was at Fee and said, hey, come work for us. I started getting paid in Bitcoin. My salary jumped 3, 4, 5, 6, 7x.
Wow.
In the period of 3, 4, 5 months. And I moved my family from one of the shittiest neighborhoods. I've never told anybody this, by the way. One of the shittiest neighborhoods in my current neck of the woods to an upscale place, changed schools. I am not exaggerating. You have changed my little girls' lives. Our whole lives upgraded, man. Our whole, like, right. I'm sitting in this beautiful place, and my daughters are going to one of the best schools in the area because of you. You know, again, you know, the
well, I was just the conduit, right? Like, you took action. You know, you couldn't have gotten this far without whatever actions you took to make this possible. But I'm grateful that
I'm a listener,
that I was
man. I was a listener. I was there, and you're good humor. God, I used to get so incensed with you about different things. You would defend the undefendable. I'd be like, Jesus, Ian, Jesus, you know. I'd argue with my computer and stuff. But then on the other hand, it was always fun to like calm myself down and go, wait, how am I thinking about this and so on. And like I'm very selfishly now taking over the podcast to say thank you. I didn't plan on doing this, but just listening to you, listening to your voice and the strength in it, I'm more upset than you are in this case. So, man,
well, let me give you a little bit of good news.
Go ahead.
We had a hearing last, because it can be overwhelming having the federal government put all of its weight against you, and that's why people take plea deals on this stuff, right? But like I said, there's no real victims in this case, and I don't even believe any laws were broken, all things considered. So it's going to be a very interesting case, and it's already gotten pretty interesting. There was a motion hearing that happened last week, and there's a report written up by one of the guys that witnessed it over at freekeen.com. That's KEENE, freekeen.com. It's fairly detailed and mostly accurate. He was actually there, so he did see this happen. But anyway, we had filed a motion a couple of months prior in federal court, where this case is, that was calling into question the state's, they have this, what they wanted to present as a so-called expert witness, the FBI's top blockchain so-called expert. And she was supposed to come in, and she's, got chainalysis on various different transactions regarding the crypto six and all that. And so basically we said, well, look, if you're going to introduce this evidence, it has to pass a certain standard. And in the courts, federal system, there's something called the Daubert standard, I guess. And essentially it says that, all evidence has to have, it has to be able to be inspected, essentially. And as far as computer things are concerned, programming and that sort of thing, you can't have a black box. You can't have closed source. So Chainalysis, and these other private companies that do blockchain analysis, they are not open source. And so their systems are they cannot be inspected. We can't see what the programming is. We can't know how they got the results that they got. And so we said, well, we're challenging this, and we want a court hearing on it. And so the prosecutors went back, and they went back to the FBI, and they said, oh, shit, you guys have to cook something else up. And so they went and they used blockchain.com instead to try to get the blockchain analysis. And they claimed that blockchain.com is open source. And what they meant by that was that anyone can use it. I don't know if blockchain.com actually publishes their source code anywhere. And so that was like one of the main thrusts of the hearing. So we ended up having this hearing where they called the expert, so-called, her name is Erin Montgomery, and they called her in to court, and it was really entertaining. I wish we could get video in federal court. Unfortunately, they don't allow that. But basically, my attorney had this lady on the ropes, and he got her to admit that, first of all, she is a liberal arts major who's never even gone to school for computers. But she got into this position and has been self-taught on blockchain over the years. She's been in the position for like a decade, but by no means is she an expert. And she actually admitted that anyone can do what she did, meaning that anyone, even my attorney, she said, could go to the same website and do the same work. And so she basically disqualified herself as an expert on the stand, and the judge had to say that she will not be allowed to be presented as an expert. She's still going to be able to testify, but she cannot be considered to be an expert witness on that in this case. So very interesting results. The main one being that they ran away from using Chainalysis because they didn't want it to get overturned as inadmissible, which is basically an admission that it's inadmissible as evidence. And then secondly, that the FBI's top blockchain expert isn't actually an expert.
Well,
you don't get stuff like this if you take a plea deal, right? Like you don't get to see their evidence. You don't get to challenge any of their evidence, and they don't have to defend any of it if you just take a plea deal. So it's going to be really interesting to see, how this all plays out. And unfortunately, the crypto media, I mean, besides your show and I think maybe an article on Bitcoin.com 2 years ago or whatever, there's been very little coverage. And that's, maybe that has to do with the philosophy that we were talking about earlier, because, we're of the old school philosophy. And so the investor types that are running the crypto media just don't care. I don't know. It's like, to me, that's like fascinating stuff, and it needs to get out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I suspect you're right, and that it doesn't fit the narrative, and kind of harkens back to something that they'd rather not address. But wow, what an amazing time for you. So how can people follow sort of the rest of the Ian Freeman saga? And hopefully it's gonna result in some precedents and some good news for the industry. But how can they follow all things Ian Freeman?
freetalklive.com. I have been posting some news there about what has been going on with the Crypto 6. There's, it's my radio show website, but I also will put up some blog type information there on the front page. That's probably the best spot to go. Also, thecrypto6.com, not my website, so I'm not in control of what goes up there, but the people that are running it seem to be pretty on top of things. Freekeen.com is a blog that focuses more on the libertarian activism here in New Hampshire, which of course involves a lot of crypto related stuff. We've had tremendous successes here in getting businesses to actually accept cryptocurrency like Bitcoin Cash and Dash in real life. So that's kind of a cool thing as well. So those are three very good outlets. And what people can do to help, you mentioned this earlier, is, look, we're fine. The lawyers are paid. We're good financially. There's actually a documentary that just got funded by some donors that are going to be doing a documentary on the Crypto 6. So I don't need donations or anything like that. But what really would help is just spreading the word, getting the word out on social media. If you know anybody in the crypto news media, to alert them to this particular story. That's the one thing that we're really lacking, is any kind of news coverage and attention to this situation, because this is going to affect. I think it's going to have a large effect on people that were doing some of the things that I was doing, like selling Bitcoin. You should be able to sell Bitcoin without having to ask government permission.
All right, my brother. Well, I appreciate all that you've done and do. And do please, if you're listening, get out there and follow Ian, and of course spread the word. Thank you, man, again so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed. Been a pleasure.